Hi, this video will explain about 1.6 Kingdom Plantae. The learning outcomes is for students to be able to describe alternation of generation in Plantae and state the classification of Plantae into four groups: bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. Plantae are all eukaryotes, multicellular eukaryotes. They are all autotroph, which means that they can produce their own food. The cell walls composition are composed of cellulose, while the storage of Plantae is in the form of starch. Plantae shows alternation of generations, meaning that the life cycle of a plant will alternate between multicellular haploid stage, which called gametophyte generation, and multicellular diploid stage, which is called sporophyte generation. Students should familiarize with the terms gametophyte and sporophyte because we are going to use these two terms many times in explanation of Plantae, Kingdom Plantae. Gametophyte comes from the word gamete, which is usually which is haploid. So please remember gametophytes. Okay, missing one T here. So gametophyte generation means that particular structure is a haploid. Half of the chromosome content or half of the genetic content, while sporophyte generation is diploid. So, gametophyte generations is the generation that gives rise to haploid male and female gametes by mitosis. While diploid generation is the sporophyte generation that gives rise to haploid spores by meiosis. So, the diploid generation will undergo meiosis, thus produce a haploid spores, while the haploid generation will give rise to female and male gametes by mitosis. So from haploid to haploid by mitosis. Understand that the process. This is the schematic. This is the diagram that shows different generation of plant, the gametophyte plant and the sporophyte plants. So here the gametophyte generation, they are haploid. So the gametophyte will undergo mitosis and then form egg or sperm. So when the egg and sperm fertilize, it also of course produce zygote, which is diploid. And then zygote will give rise to embryo and become a sporophyte generation. While sporophyte generation then will undergo meiosis because sporophyte generations are diploid. So diploid undergo meiosis, of course it will produce haploid spore. Both gametophyte and sporophyte are very different in morphology. The structure is visible to our own eyes. So the structure that are shown in this slide, they are actually the green structure here is the gametophyte, the haploid, haploid generation. The only the structure here that extrude from the gametophyte generation is the sporophyte generation, meaning that this part is the diploid part. Okay, diploid sporophyte has sporangium which contains spores. While in the sporangium, the diploid cells called sporocyte will undergo meiosis and form haploid spores. Then her haploid spores will divide mitotically and grow into a multicellular haploid gametophyte. So the haploid spores will not simultaneously after they are produced, then they directly fertilize and form diploid. No, they will grow into a haploid gametophyte first before they can produce gamete, before they can produce gamete. So the haploid gametophyte produce male and female gametes by mitosis, and then the gametes will undergo fertilization and form diploid zygote. So the zygote will grow into a diploid sporophyte. Okay, before that is the alternation of generation. Now we are going to look into the classification under kingdom Plantae. First, when we want to classify Plantae, or we want to group Plantae into what group or classification, we look at a few structure that the plants have. First, whether the plants is a non-vascular or vascular, whether they have the structure that helps in the transportation of food and water, the vascular system. So those plants that has no vascular system are grouped into one group only, bryophytes. So under group bryophytes, there are a few phylum: Bryophyta, Hepatophyta, and Anthocerophyta. We will see later on there are a few distinctive features between these three phyla. But because they are because they are classified under non-vascular, so we know that Bryophyta, Hepatophyta, and Anthocerophyta, they don't have the xylem and the phloem that form the vascular system. Okay, next, under vascular plants, the plants that has vascular system, they are divided into seedless or plants with seed. So there are plants that can produce seeds, there are plants that cannot produce seed. So the seedless plants are grouped into or classified into pteridophytes, grouped into pteridophyte. And under pteridophyte ni, biasanya pteridophyte ni adalah kita panggil paku-pakis. Under pteridophyte, we have two phyla, the Lycophyta and Pterophyta. Okay, the plant that can produce seed, there are two groups, two distinctive groups, the gymnosperm and the angiosperm. So the difference between these two types of plants, these two groups of plants, gymnosperm produce seed, but the seed is not enclosed by fruit, meaning that we cannot say that plants bear fruit, tidak ada buah daripada pokok tu. So this type of plants, they have sperms, meaning they have the seeds, but they don't have the fruit. Contoh fruit ni, bila kita makan buah mangga, dia punya seed dia biji yang kita tak makan. Yang kita makan tu adalah buahnya, yang bahagian buahnya yang sedap tu. Dan bijinya kita tak makan. So there are 4 phyla under gymnosperms: Cycadophyta, Coniferophyta, Gingophyta, and Gnetophyta. While under angiosperms, seeds that enclosed by fruit, we have all are Anthocyta. But then under Anthocyta, there are 2 types of classes: Dicotyledone, Monocotyledone. So angiosperms are considered all Anthocyta. Ni yang kita biasa jumpa lah. Sebenarnya ada banyak lagi phylum lain, tapi awak tak belajar lah. Kita tak perlu ingat lah nama phylum bawah angiosperm. Yang biasa kita jumpa adalah Anthocyta, maknanya yang ada bunga. So these are all bryophytes. Ni yang biasa kita panggil, kadang-kadang kita panggil lumut. Sebenarnya dia bila dia subur dan membesar, inilah rupa dia. Okay, bryophytes. Okay, let's look at the characteristics of bryophytes. The dominant generation is gametophyte because they shows alternation of generations. So we have to determine which generation is dominant. Which generation is dominant? In terms of dominant, means that which generation that we will common or mostly find or look at the structure visible to our own eyes most of the time. And then which generation depends on which generation. So the generation that that give dependence to another generation is the dominant one. So in bryophytes, the generation that is dominant is the gametophyte. You see, the gametophyte holding the sporophyte. So sporophyte actually depends on the gametophyte because gametophyte large in size and long-lived, while the sporophyte are smaller and short-lived. The sporophyte depend on gametophyte for nutrients and water because the structure, it has a root-like structure that helps in that function in food and water, nutrients and water absorption. And the gametophyte able to carry out photosynthesis, so they store food, and the sporophyte depends on the gametophyte. Let's look at the example of Bryophyta, Marcantia species. The gametophyte and the sporophyte of the Marcantia species. So the structure that we are looking in this slide is actually a gametophyte generation. The sporophyte generation is in the structure. This is the sporophyte, the zygote in the structure. Okay. Okay. The whole structure, uh, the food, the seta. This is the sporophyte, smaller than the gametophyte. So this sporophyte depends on the gametophyte. So inside the sporophyte is the sporangium. Sporangium that will bear the haploid spore. This is Polytrichum species. Nampak macam rumput biasa, but it actually uh, uh, a plant that is gametophyte, that is haploid. So the structure, this is the reproductive structure, the sporangium. So bila sporangium, maknanya pokok yang the gametophyte that's holding the sporophyte is actually the female bryophytes, while the male gametophyte will only have this structure, but it will not form the sporangium. Okay, the sporangium. Jadi beza, nak tahu beza antara female and male gametophyte of polytrichum, apabila dia dah keluar struktur sporangium ni, sebab dalam ni akan ada dalam ni lah zygotnya. Okay, zygote tu dia akan membentuk sporangium. Dalam sporangium tu ada spore, haploid spore. Okay. Jadi kalau yang male, dia hanya ada struktur male reproduktif ni. Jadi bila male struktur reproduktif, dia tak boleh bear the sporophyte. So daripada gambar ni, because this has sporophyte, so this is definitely the female gametophyte. The bryophytes are non-vascular plants because from the diagram shown before earlier, most lack of vascular tissues for transport and support. So memang bukan most lah, memang all lah, they are non-vascular plants, so they lack of vascular tissues. They do not have true roots, stems and leaves. Tadi nampak macam daun kan? Sebenarnya kita tak panggil dia daun. Kita ada istilah yang lebih sesuai sebab dia tak ada vascular system. Kalau daun ni dia akan include phloem, xylem semua. Stem pun dia ada phloem, xylem, roots pun dia ada phloem, xylem. But because they lack of vascular tissues, so they are not considered as true roots, true stems and true leaves. But they also have specialized conducting tissues to transport water and organic compounds. And the cell walls lack of lignin. So this is Marcantia species. This is the structure called thallus. Thallus. So thallus is the kind of leaf that have no vascular system. So it is called thallus. Kalau tumbuhan kita panggil dia daun, but this one we call it thallus. The structure that's anchoring the bryophytes onto the soil and the rock are called rhizoid instead of roots. So rhizoid. Gametophyte consists of only one or a few cells thick. Nipis lah maksudnya. So all cells are placed close to water. So dia tak ada vascular system, jadi dia tak meninggi. Jadi macam mana dia nak menyerap air? They need to be close to the soil. So because the soil contain water, so the cells are placed close to water and dissolve minerals. So it will provide large surface area to increase absorption of water and minerals. Macam makan ni sebab tu dia leper-leper talus dia, dan dia memang melekat. Talus ni sendiri dekat dengan tanah. Most grow close to the ground, supported by rhizoids. Rhizoids will anchor the bryophytes to the substratum. Okay, bawah daun ni ada, bawah talus ni ada struktur ni rhizoid ni. Nampak macam berbulu-bulu. Sebenarnya tu adalah untuk penyerapan air dan mineral. Do not play a primary role in water and mineral absorption, but they still can perform the task, the function. They live in moist and shady places. They cannot have direct access to sunlight. Sebab nanti air akan mudah tersejat ataupun nanti cepat kering. Watery medium is needed for both asexual and sexual reproduction. They need the water. Besides, they need the water for their storage. They also need the water for reproduction, because the water is the medium for the spores to be dispersed, and also for the gamete to swim. In asexual reproduction, the gamma is the kind of spore that the bryophytes have, the markantia. Dispersal of gamma from gamma cup needs watery medium such as raindrops. Bila hujan turun daripada langit tu, dia ada percik macam kita nak tuang air tinggi, nak tarik ke apa, kita buat tarik tu. Lagi tinggi percikan ke mula kan, air yang masuk ke dalam cawan tu dia akan terpercik. So gamma cup ni macam cawan yang ada di atas talus markantia. So this is the talus, and there will be a cup. In the cup there are gamma spore. So when water drop, so there will be a splash, then this splash will carry out some of the gamma spore. Jadi this is how they are dispersed. While in sexual reproduction, the flagellated sperm cells will need the water to swim swim towards the female reproductive organs called archegonia. Okay, this is the talus that I draw just now, and on the talus there will be a cup, a structure that contain the gamma, the spores. So as if when the rain drops, as if we are pouring water into a cup, and then the water splash carrying the gamma along with the splash. Same with the polytrichum. This is polytrichum species. Just now is the earlier slide is the markantia species. But difference, because of the structure difference, in polytrichum species there is no cup, but the sporangium, the seta, the capsule able to burst, and thus will disperse the spores. Disperse the spores with the help of the wind, and then when the water comes, the spores will be carried by the water away from the gametophyte ataupun untuk dia tersebar lah. In Polytrichum species, okay, this is the archegonium. Archegonium is the female sex organ. Enteridium, enter, is the male sex organ. So, enteridium produce flagellated sperm, and then the sperm will swim with the presence of water towards the archegonium. Almost similar to animals. Sebab tu, that is why bryophytes needs to live in watery or moist environment. Then haploid gametophytes produce gametangium. Gametangium is the structure that's holding the sporangium, or the gametes. Haploid gametes are produced and developed within gametangium. So gametangium is the structure that's holding the gamete. There are two types of gametangium, the archegonium and the enteridium. So archegonium is female gametangium, enteridium is male gametangium. In Markantia, the archegonium is the coconut, looks like a coconut tree, while the enteridium looks like a, you can call it anything. Like for me, it looks like an umbrella. Umbrella yang rata tu, bukan umbrella yang biasa tu. Archegonium macam pokok kelapa tu kalau kita nak bezakan. Bryophytes divided into three phyla. Hepatophyta. Hepa usually means liver. So the example of hepatophyta is liverworts. Ini nama common dia lah, liverworts. Nama spesies dia ialah Markantia species. While bryophytes, ni adalah mosses. Biasa kita panggil lumut jati ke bahasa Melayu dia, lumut jati mosses. The scientific name is Polytrichum species. While Entocerophyta, ento ni biasa related to tanduk, horn. Okay, sebab apa dia ada struktur ni yang macam tanduk? Sebab tu nama dia Entocerophyta. Jadi hornworts. Entoceros, lumut tanduk bahasa Melayu dia ni, lumut hati bahasa Melayu dia, lumut hati. Kan nampak perkataan dia berkaitan, liverworts, hepatophyta. So, bryophytes are all multicellular and dependent embryo. Diploid zygote develops into diploid embryo by mitosis within the archegonium. Archegonium is the female reproductive organ. Gametophyte carries out photosynthesis and provides developing embryo with nutrients and water. This is all characteristics that bryophytes have for them, that makes them can survive in the terrestrial environment. Maksudnya bagaimana dia bermandiri, how do they survive? So because they have ability to conserve water by having waterproof cuticle. Jadi dia perlu duduk dekat tempat berair. Dan pada masa yang sama dia perlu conserve air tu dalam dia punya struktur. So bagaimana dia boleh prevent water loss daripada kalau tiba-tiba je daripada sejuk kepada panas, kan, cuaca. So they have waterproof cuticles. Dan juga pada masa yang sama dia tidak terlalu banyak air yang boleh masuk dalam badan dia. So they have waterproof cuticles. So they can survive in watery medium. Tak jadi lembik, tak jadi benyek, kan. In some bryophytes, epidermis of leaves and other aerial parts is coated with cuticle to prevent excessive loss of water by evaporation. Thus, they help prevent the bryophytes from being desiccated, drying out. Jadi tak kering. Tapi kalau dah lama-lama juga, dia akan kering juga. They also have a structure, wall spores produced in sporangium. Mana sporangium dia ada dinding yang boleh melindungi haploid spores. The walls of haploid spores contain sporopollenin, making the walls become tough and resistant to harsh environments. So the spores can retain the different the temperature and the climate. So they can prolong their life. Enable the wind-carried spores to disperse through air without being desiccated. Jadi walaupun dia terbang dengan angin dan mungkin boleh tersejat, tapi dia tak tersejat atau tak jadi kering. The outer tissues of sporangium protect spores until they are released into air. Bryophytes also have multicellular gametangium. Gametes are produced within gametangia, which has a layer of sterile. Dia multicellular gametangium ni penting sebab dia sendiri tak non-reproductive. So it will protect the gametes. Diploid zygote develops into embryo within the female gametangium. This will protect the embryo during its development. So what do you think? Do you think bryophytes can help prevent landslides on tropical mountain? The next group of plants under kingdom Plantae is pteridophyte. Yang biasa kita our layman terms is pakis pteridophytes. But you have to know there are so many types of pteridophytes, not only the pakis. Pteridophytes are seedless plants. They don't produce seeds. They produce spores. They have vascular tissues, but a very simple vascular tissues. So we are going to learn about how simple the vascular tissues and how does it different with the angiosperm and gymnosperms vascular tissue. So they have vascular tissue but simple because the vascular tissue helps transport water and nutrients and also provide mechanical support. Sebab tu kita tengok pokok pteridophytes ni dia dah lebih tinggi daripada bryophytes tadi. Bryophytes biasa rendah-rendah sangat yang kita selalu terpijak-pijak jadi macam ingatkan rumput. So they have lignified phloem and xylem. Sebab tu dia kukuh. That's why they can provide mechanical support. But the vascular tissue is not well developed. So the vascular system is considered as non-complex vascular system. Most common habitat of pteridophytes are in damp places, moist places. Pteridophytes' life cycles also shows alternation of generation, while with the dominant generation is sporophyte. So this is another difference between pteridophytes and bryophytes, because the dominant generation of pteridophytes is sporophyte already, bukannya gametophyte lagi dah. Because the sporophytes is larger in size and long-lived compared to the gametophyte. So gametophyte is smaller and then free-living, and the young sporophyte depend on gametophyte for a while for nutrition, sekejap je. So this is the young sporophyte, and then after when they are larger and able to absorb nutrients and water by themselves, they will be independent. So the mature sporophyte is not dependent on the gametophyte for nutrition because it can carry their own photosynthesis. So these are all dominant sporophyte of two different species of pteridophytes. Protalus is the young. Protalus is the gametophyte, and then the young sporophyte will grow on the protalus. Okay. Sporophyte. The sporophyte of pteridophyte has two roots, stems, and leaves due to the presence of the vascular tissues. It also has stomata that allow gases exchange and transpiration. And the sporophyte has adventitious root. Sekarang kita dah guna istilah root untuk pteridophyte sebab dia punya root dah ada vascular system. Sporophyte has waterproof cuticles. The reproduction of pteridophytes the fertilization depends fully on watery medium because the sperms are flagellated sperms, so they need to swim towards the archegonium to reach the egg cell in the archegonium. That's why pteridophyte still needs to live in watery medium ataupun a moist habitat. Pteridophytes reproduce sexually by producing spore for dispersion. There are two types of pteridophytes based on the production of spores. Homosporous, homo meaning the same. So spore dia semuanya tak ada jantan atau betina. It is not differentiated into male or female spores. Kita tak panggil male and female, kita panggil dia microspore and megaspore. So micro is for male, mega is for female. The pteridophyte that is homosporous is Lycopodium species and Rhiopteris species. Jadi ini kena ingat supaya you tahu Lycopodium dengan Rhiopteris ni homosporous, while heterosporous contoh dia adalah Selaginella species. Heterosporous means they have two different kinds of spore, the microspore and megaspore. This is at the back of the pteridophyte's leaf. Dia punya structure yang ada mengandungi spores. Ni dalam ni adalah sporingia. Ni satu ni belum spore lagi. Dalam sporangium ni baru ada spore. The cluster of sporangia. Ni yang hitam-hitam ni sporangium. Dalam dia baru ada spore. So a cluster of the sporangia is called sorus. So for homosporous pteridophytes, when we observe under microscope, there is no difference in the sporangium. Maknanya dalam sporangium ni semua nampak sama saiz je dia punya spore. Halus je So the spores will develop into bisexual gametophyte that consists of both archegonium and enteridium. So tak ada beza archegonium and enteridium. Pada struktur yang sama. While heterosporous, we can see the difference in the structure or in the spores. Okay, yang besar ni megaspore. So this is megasporangium. Yang halus-halus ni microspore. So kita panggil ni adalah microsporangium. Always remember micro will be related to male, mega related to do not get confused. Classification of pteridophytes. First we have phylum Lycophyta. Ada juga setengah reference dia guna nama Lycopodiophyta. So Lycopodiophyta is Lycophyta. Jadi dalam matrix peringkat syllabus kita gunakan Lycophyta. So the species that falls under Lycophyta is Lycopodium species and Selaginella species. While phylum Pteridophyta, the species are Dryopteris species. Dryopteris ni yang biasa kita nampak paku pakis tu tu Dryopteris ataupun fern. Lycopodium species are homosporous. Dia macam pokok ru, small spine shaped leaf, tajam-tajam ni. Modified leaves that bear sporangia. Nanti we will at the end of the microphyll ni, kat ujung ni biasanya ada sporangia. So sporangia ni di hujung ni yang ada sporangia ni kita panggil dia strobilus. Strobilus ni ada sporofil. Okay. Sporofil ni yang daun ni, yang struktur daun ni. Ni the whole structure is strobilus. And then setiap pada sporofil ni dia melindungi sporangium. Okay. Ni Selaginella, dia lebih flat daripada Lycopodium. Selaginella dia flat. So ni microphyll dia. Strobilus dia kat ujung ni saja. Jadi kat ujung ni kalau kita potong, kalau dia dah kuning, kita potong, kita buat kerata rentas, kita akan nampak this structure. Ada microspore dengan megaspore. This is the Bryopteris. Dia punya struktur lebih kompleks. Dia dah panggil frond ni untuk satu tangkai daun yang kita, kalau kita petik paku kan, satu frond. Tangkai yang kita potong ni rachis, ni bawah ni roots. Dan pecahan-pecahan frond ni ada pinule, dan ni pinna, satu bilah, dan pecahan lagi pinule. The fiddle head, kalau ada tempat panggil pucuk midin ataupun pucuk yang kepada pucuk paku tu, okay, tu fiddle head. Ni pokok paku pakis besar, paku pakis gajah panggil. Okay, let's look at, let's compare between phyla and pteridophytes. Okay, bila compare mesti ada similarity dan juga differences. In terms of similarity, all pteridophytes have sporophyte as its dominant generation. Antheridia and Archegonia grow on the same gametophyte. So, kita tak jumpa pakis jantan, pakis betina. They are all on the same gametophyte. Water is essential for fertilization because they all have flagellated sperm. Phylum Lycopodiophyta, phylum Pteridophyta. Differences between these two, Lycopodiophyta atau Lycophyta, Lycophyta and Pteridophyta. The leaves are small and scaly, called sporophylls, while Pteridophyta, the leaves are larger, called fronds or pinna. The sporangia on sporophyll are grouped together forming strobilus, but for the Pteridophyta, the cluster of sporangia are on the back of the sporophyll, on the leaves. Kita tak panggil sporophyll, kita panggil dia fronds. Gametophyte body lack of chlorophyll. In Lycopodiophyta, gametophyte body dia tak ada prothallus tadi, but for Pteridophyta, the gametophyte body or the prothallus has chlorophyll for photosynthesis. Okay, yang Pteridophyta kita panggil dia prothallus untuk gametophyte body, tapi bagi Lycopodiophyta kita tak panggil dia prothallus, kita panggil dia gametophyte saja. Identify each of the following structure as haploid or diploid. Sporophyte, haploid or diploid? Surely sporophyte should be diploid. What about spore in Pteridophyta? Spore in Pteridophytes, they are haploid. Kalau dalam bryophytes, dia boleh haploid, dia boleh diploid. Gametophyte, of course, dia haploid. Zygote, diploid. Sperm, haploid. Okay, gymnosperms. Gymnosperm, gambar ni, these are 4 different kinds of gymnosperm. All gymnosperms are heterosporous, meaning they have 2 different spores, the micro and the mega. Microspore and megaspore. Gymnosperms are seed-bearing plants, but the seed is not enclosed by fruit, which is called as naked seed. So the seeds are exposed on sporophyll. Ini kalau kita ada setengah orang ni dipanggil nanas batu. Ni saya panggil cone je sebab dia daripada conifer, kita panggil ni struktur sebagai cone. So cone, they have seed but they do not produce fruits because they don't have the ovary. Gymnosperms have complex, lignified vascular plants. Jadi dia dah advance ataupun lebih maju berbanding pteridophytes tadi. Pteridophyte dia ada vascular system tetapi simple vascular system. But gymnosperm, the vascular system is more complex. Because they have xylem, dia dah specific, specialized tissues, but the xylem only have tracheids, but they do not contain vessel element, while the phloem of gymnosperms contain only sieve tube, but they do not contain companion cell. Most gymnosperms have cones on which sporangium develop. And then the cones consist of closely packed sporophyll. Ni tadi sporophyll macam daun pada pteridophyte kan, daun macam daun. So dia sama lebih kurang, tetapi dia punya sporophyll biasanya lebih keras ataupun lebih besar. Some have thick cuticles and needle-shaped leaves. Okay. Sebab bila needle shape ni dia reduce, dia punya size lebih kecil, jadi dia reduce water loss. Dominant generation is sporophyte generation. Jadi sporophyte generation ni independent lah, dia tak bergantung dengan gametophyte macam bryophytes. The gametophyte generation is reduced, meaning that they are smaller and depends on the sporophyte for nutrients. The pollination agent is no longer the pollination, sebab dia dah ada pollen. Jadi dia punya fertilization dah tak bergantung, do not depends on water. So the pollination agent is mostly wind. Dia dah tak bergantung, dia tak macam tumbuhan berbunga tu, dia perlukan pollination agent, ada haiwan, angin ke apa kan. Tapi untuk gymnosperm, the pollination agent is wind. Water is not needed because the sperm do not swim. The sperms are non-motile. And then sperm cell are conveyed to egg cell by pollen tube. Pinus is the gymnosperm. Dia tidak berbunga. There are 4 phyla under gymnosperm. Coniferophyta, Cycadophyta. Coniferophyta contohnya Pinus species. Cycadophyta, Cycas species. Ginkgophyta, the example is Ginkgo biloba, Ginkgo biloba, and Gametophyta natum species. Reproductive structure of Pinophyta, Coniferophyta, cone. Same with Cycadophyta, but for Ginkgophyta, already named as Strobilus, it has fan-shaped leaves, bentuk kipas ni. For Gametophyta, dia dah macam angiosperm because it has broad leaf. The reproductive structure is flower-like strobilus. Flower-like, dia dah macam bunga, ada kelopak. Macam ada kelopak, tapi sebenarnya dia struktur strobilus. Okay, you can read the differences, the morphology, the difference in morphology for each phylum in terms of vascular tissue. So, Pinophyta, xylem consists of trachea. Cycadophyta, xylem consists of trachea. Ginkgophyta, xylem consists of trachea. And Gametophyta, dia dah advance daripada yang ketiga-tiga because it consists of trachea and vessel element. Okay, dia dah ada advancement here. Same with phloem. Only Gametophyta have sieve tube and companion cell in the phloem. And then monoecious, dioecious. Okay, this term means mono means single, meaning pokok dia ada satu jenis saja. The separate male and female reproductive part located on the same plant. Jadi tak ada tumbuh pokok jantan, pokok betina. No male or female plant. While for Cycadophyta, we can find 2 separate male and female plant. Okay. Ginkgophyta, dioecious also, meaning that we should be able to find male Ginkgo biloba and female Ginkgo biloba. Gametophyta ada yang dioecious, ada yang monoecious. Angiosperm, the fruitful plants. The phylum yang kita belajar, phylum Entophyta. Angiosperm are seedy plants, and the seeds are enclosed by fruit, no longer naked seed lah. They have complex lignified vascular plants. Jadi dia dah ada perkataan complex, lignified, and the explanation is more detailed. The xylem contain all vessel element and tracheids. Phloem contain companion cell and sieve tube. Sama tadi tak dengan Gnatophyta tadi kan? Gnatophyta tu dia dah hampir nak masuk kepada angiosperm. Tapi malangnya dia punya biji benih dia not enclosed in a fruit. Sebab tu dia tak masuk dalam angiosperm. Angiosperms are heterosporous. Their dominant generation is sporophyte. So gametophyte is reduced and depends on sporophyte. Gametophyte dia adalah dalam ovary sebelum fertilization. So very small. They do not require water for fertilization because sperm cells are non-motile, so they need the pollen tube to direct the sperm towards the egg cell. Angiosperm undergo double fertilization. Dalam gymnosperm tadi kita tak mention tentang double fertilization. Jadi it is special to angiosperm. So because of double fertilization, the ovary develops into fruit, ovule develops into seed, and seed consists of diploid embryo. And the seed is enclosed by seed coat. And the fruit protect the seed and aid in dispersal. Inilah bila buah tu sedap, ada buah, bila buah tu sedap, jadi binatang makan. Bila binatang makan biji dia telan, biji telan sekali. Kemudian burung contohnya makan cili, dia terbang tempat lain, dia akan berak kat tempat lain dan keluar sekali biji benih. Jadi biji benih tu akan bercambah, itu dispersal. Sexual reproductive structure is called flower. Sebab tu dipanggil flowering plant. Flowers are bright in colours, mostly bright in colours, scented, and offer pollen or nectar as food. So pollination by several agents includes insects and animals instead of weed. Jadi sebab dia nak attract the insects, dia usually have nice scent or nice food as nectar. Compare and contrast a pine cone and a flower in terms of structure and function. Cone ada strobilus tapi bukan flower. Okay, tu simple lah, tu jawapan simple saya. Compare and contrast process of fertilization in pine species and hibiscus rosa. So the keyword is apa? What is the keyword? Double fertilization dengan no double fertilization. So let's look at evolutionary relationship in plant kingdom. Bila evolutionary relationship, kita nak tengok mana yang advanced, mana yang simple. Okay, jadi in terms of what kita nak declare yang dia ni lebih advanced daripada plant yang lain. First in terms of size. And then the dominance, which generation is dominant? Gametophyte or sporophyte? Jadi those plants that have sporophyte as dominant generation is considered more advanced. And then the dependency of the gametophytes and sporophytes. So which one depends on which generation? So when the sporophyte depends on gametophyte, so it is considered as less advanced. Water dependency in fertilization. In those plants which has advanced characteristic, the plants does not depend on water for fertilization. Dia dah ada kaedah lain, dia dah lebih advance, dia dah tak perlu air ni, duduk jauh daripada air pun tak apa, sebab tu dia dah nampak, dia dah consider sebagai lebih maju. The presence and complexity of vascular tissues, dah lebih advance sebab dia dah lebih kompleks dan menyebabkan pokok tu menjadi lebih tinggi, lebih besar. And embryo protection. So based on these characteristics, you boleh tengok evolutionary relationship. Tengok dalam jadual ni. That was why bryophytes are considered as the least advanced of plants, yang kita panggil primitive, considered as primitive plants because it is small, the gametophyte is more dominant, the sporophyte depends on the gametophytes, they need water, they cannot live other places that does not have water because they don't have the structure that can go down into the soil and find water in the soil. They don't have that structure because they don't have the complex vascular tissue. do not have vascular tissue. They don't have true roots. They don't have true leaf. They don't have true stem. So they cannot grow higher. And then the female gametophyte will protect the embryo, not the sporophyte. And then they have no seed. They cannot disperse by other they cannot disperse their generation, or dia punya they cannot form colony ataupun form colony in another part as they like, because they need to be where it is comfortable, which is a watery or moist area. They have only one type of spore. So dia very simple, primitive. Itu sebab bila evolutionary relationship ni kita akan tengok dari segi perubahan, peningkatan, kemajuan tumbuh-tumbuhan tersebut. Okay, from smaller size sporophyte in bryophyte to bigger size sporophyte in gymnosperms and angiosperms. Okay, then dominance of gametophyte and sporophyte. Bryophytes have gametophyte generation which is dominant, and then gymnosperm and angiosperm semua pteridophytes dominant, sporophyte dominant. The dependency of gametophyte and sporophyte. Bryophyte, the sporophyte depends on gametophyte. The other three groups, the gametophyte depends on sporophyte. But pteridophyte, the other the young sporophyte depends on the gametophyte, but then the mature sporophyte does not depend on the gametophyte. Dependency, water dependency in fertilization. Bryophyte does not need water. Bryophyte needs water for fertilization. Pteridophyte needs water for fertilization, but then gymnosperms and angiosperms no longer depends on water for fertilization. The presence of vascular tissue does not absent in bryophytes, but then starting from pteridophyte, it has already have vascular tissue, but it is simple. And then advanced to gymnosperm, which has complex vascular tissue, but not complete, incomplete. And angiosperm have a complex and complete vascular tissue. Tu nampak dia punya advancement. Embryo protection, gametophyte in bryophytes and pteridophyte protected by the sporophyte. But in gymnosperm, the embryo in bryophyte protected by gametophyte, because gametophyte is the dominant generation. But for gymnosperm and angiosperm, the embryo is protected by the sporophyte. Okay, thank you everyone.